Welcome everyone to this candidate forum featuring candidates for Minnesota House 7A and 7B here in Duluth. Welcome to the candidates themselves, welcome to those folks here in the audience and people watching online later, although when you watch it, it'll be right now. Welcome to our editorial board members are here. Classy Dudley is a citizen representative, as is Vern Swanham. Employee representative is Chris Barikin. Our publisher, Neil Ronquist, is also an editorial board member. The candidate forums are twofold, the purpose of them. One, of course, is part of our mission to try to educate the electorate on the candidates and the issues. And we're also going to be using this forum, our editorial board, to determine our endorsements. I want to also introduce our timekeeper, Tina Gaida. Each of you will take turns answering questions. Your answers will be timed, and you'll take turns answering first. The forum will be posted at DuluthNewsTribune.com. At the end, I welcome the Civility Project for being here and handing out literature on your way in. I don't think we'll have a problem with outbursts or anything like that, but just in case we do, read your sheet and try to behave yourselves. With that, we will begin by allowing each of the candidates 1.5 minutes to introduce yourself, maybe discuss why you're running and what your qualifications are, and we'll go left to right, and we'll begin with Dylan Radden.
Hi there, I'm Dylan Radden, the GOP candidate for District 7A. I am not a certified economist. I don't possess the 20 years of experience that the current incumbent has. I'll be honest with that. However, what I do have is solutions to some of the problems that I believe need to drastically be fixed in the city of Duluth. I'm not satisfied with some of the lack of progress I've seen and some of the bickering from not just the DFL but the GOP party as well. And I'm looking at ways to overall fix the given state of the economy in Duluth. Take, for example, the $3 million deficit that the school district of Duluth, Minnesota possesses. In early March of this year, we had the opportunity to sell said school, Old Central High School, a decrepit building with approximately $270,000 worth of tax burdens, to a Edison charter school for a sum of $15 million. Rather than coming with a means to having a bipartisanship to sell it and obtain profits and eliminate the deficit, there was bickering, and thus the building was decrepit. Throughout this forum, I'm going to explain much more of my ideals of bringing forth the new Zenith City. And in conclusion, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Representative Schultz.
So, hello, my name's Jen Schultz, and I'm currently the state legislator for District 7A. I'm just finishing my first term, and I'm running for re-election to use my unique skills and abilities and experience to help the people of Duluth and the people from Minnesota. I am an economist, and I've been working at UMD as a professor for close to 14 years. And my specialty is healthcare. So one of the reasons I'm running again for office, and one of the reasons I ran originally, was to help reform our healthcare system in Minnesota. So as many people know, our healthcare system is very complex. Health insurance is not affordable for many, and it's not accessible. So my goal is to work on that issue. And I also bring experience in higher ed. So two of the largest industries in Duluth are healthcare and higher education. So I know many things about those to help people and help in economic development for Duluth. So I'm really, really excited to be running again. I've really enjoyed my time in the state legislature and my ability to help people in Duluth. And I've been very, very accessible to my constituents, and I want to continue the work I've been doing. And so far, it's been one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career.
Thank you so much. Of course, Representative Schultz and Dylan Radden are opposing each other in House District 7A. In House District 7B, Cody Behringer is opposing Liz Olson, and Mr. Behringer will go to you next.
Thank you, Chuck. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cody Behringer. To answer your question, why I'm running, I've been becoming increasingly concerned about the direction of our state, and I've been concerned about what's been going on in politics. I have a young child that I care a lot about, and I'm just worried about the way our country and our state is going. So, as an example, we've got a legislature now that hasn't finished their job. They haven't passed the bonding bill. there's been conflict there, there's been partisanship, and I go to work every day just like everybody else, and I'm sick of seeing this kind of partisanship, and I'm sick of seeing this kind of fighting, stuff not getting done, politics getting played. So what I want to do is I want to bring the work ethic that I use when I work to go to the Capitol, to bring new ideas, and to bring a fresh perspective, just to do the best that I can for our state, move it in the right direction.
And what is it that you do, sir?
I am a flight instructor at Lake Superior College.
Liz Olson.
Hi, I'm Liz Olson, and I'm running to represent District 7B in the Minnesota House of Representatives. And I'm running because I believe in a Minnesota where everyone can thrive. And that means living wage jobs with good benefits. It means well-funded, well-supported schools. It means access to health care coverage that's quality and affordable, and it expands who participates in our democracy. And more than that, I'm running because I believe in healthy communities, and the way that we set policy can actually improve people's lives. I'm someone who cares about my daughter's future and want to make sure that when she walks out of our front door on her first day of kindergarten, she walks through a neighborhood that's thriving and vibrant and into a classroom that allows for her to succeed in whatever way she chooses. Beyond that, it allows for every student in the classroom, regardless of socioeconomic status or race, to be able to succeed. I've been active in the Duluth community for the last 12 years on a number of issues, from expanding access to health care coverage to helping to end homelessness. I've built relationships with elected officials, community leaders, and residents throughout the district, and I will take those relationships and I will continue to build on them to represent the folks of 7B and all of Duluth. So I look forward to having the opportunity to talk a little bit more and your chance to get to know me and hear where I stand on the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, candidates. I'll ask Classy to please read our first question.
Okay. This year's legislative session ended without a bonding bill, without transportation funding, without an increase in local government aid, and with other failings. What could have been done differently?
Jen, you were the only one there. We'll start with you.
Thank you. So it was frustrating for me as well. And we can do a lot to fix the system that I think is very broken. The first thing that needs to happen is we need to set targets earlier and make sure that we don't move those targets. And those budget targets, so setting the budget numbers earlier when it's a budget year, and the bonding bill targets earlier, and have an open process. So right now, what happened in the past is that the leaders got together in a closed room, closed doors, and it wasn't accessible to the public and have comments from our constituents to give input and feedback, and even have other members of the legislature involved in that process. So we need a more open process. We need to have set targets early on. And because it's become so partisan, we really need to reform how we redistrict and how we finance our campaigns. So a lot of bills were introduced. None of those got a hearing in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives to reform the system and make it work better.
Thank you. Cody?
Thanks. I agree with the idea that we need to have more transparency. What happened was you got pushed down to the last minute, and literally to the last minute, and there wasn't a solution. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is after the session ended, the bonding bill was still not approved, and our government got held hostage. So initially, the light rail was not funded, and because the light rail was not funded, there wasn't any agreement. And so while I understand that there are projects that each side wants, and different people have different opinions on what's most urgent, holding that hostage and not calling a special session because you're not getting what you want is not best for our state.
Thank you. Liz?
So I would agree with what's been said here a little bit about that we need to have more transparency in our process, and we need to set benchmarks so that bills aren't passed in the 11th hour of the night when people are sleep deprived, trying to read things, mistakes happen as we saw this year. So there are actually policy changes that we can enact, like that could actually happen, that we could start setting those targets earlier, as Jen mentioned. And beyond that, I think, the question of compromise always comes up, right? I think it's really hard to compromise at the 11th hour. I think compromise in good government actually takes a step back and starts how we enter the Capitol on day one. And so it's about building relationships, it's about building trust, it's about having a common vision for our state. After all, we want to see the same things about like having our families be able to succeed and things. And so I think we back up the conversation about how we enter government together on day one, and we also we put some policy solutions into action right away so that we don't make decisions in the middle of the night with a small group of people, but we bring that transparency to the process.
Good, Dylan?
Jumping on all of these constituents of mine, I do agree in the notion that there needs to be a more efficient way of conducting bonding bills. However, as I have seen through my former employer, common sense is not as common as one thinks. And unfortunately, some of the bonding proposals that I personally had read through, the hundreds and hundreds of pages that I had weaved through, some of the proposals were inefficient towards improving the city of Duluth. While one, for example, may be willing to put $26 million towards the improvement of individualized therapy at Miller Dewan or 3 West, for example, the same citizen might not be willing to put $26 million towards the Glensham Mansion. Ideas proposed by the DFL Senate in the current bonding bill attempt. While one may be willing to put $15 million towards improving a school district, one wouldn't be willing to put $15 million towards a hockey rink program in Minnesota. So with better efficiency towards the usage of bonding projects, in my opinion, that is one way that we can overall improve the state and create bipartisanship between both constituents of Republican and Democrat alike. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vern will ask our next question, please.
How do you support funding bridge and highway maintenance, an increase in the gas tax, a miles driven tax, cutting other things from the state budget, some other strategy, or a combination?
And we'll begin with Cody.
You know, I don't think that we should be increasing taxes unless it's absolutely necessary. So I do think that we need to look at the things in our budget, and we need to go through that item by item and make sure that there aren't things that are being wasteful before we start imposing higher gas tax. That's going to hurt individuals, and it's going to hurt the economy.
Thank you very much, Liz.
So yes, I support looking at solutions however we need to. I trust that we all drove safely here across a bridge or two, and that we really need good infrastructure in order to get by with our daily lives, and we need to make an investment in that. And so in order to have anything that's safe and worth doing, we need to put money towards that. And so I support a way, whether it be a gas tax or a wheel tax, I would be interested in talking more about what the solution is or coming up with a more creative plan. I do believe we need to be forward thinking in how we think about transportation infrastructure so that it's long-term solutions that prioritize things in greater Minnesota as well, and that we think about equity throughout the entire state when we think about transportation.
Thank you. Dylan.
One of the ways that I would suggest improving the ability to fund for highway expenses is only increasing taxes if there has been a historical need to raise taxes. For example, the highway tax has not been raised since the early 90s. And keep in mind, this is not a percentage basis. This is merely a cent by cent basis. I don't know the exact figure, but I believe it's about 29 cents or something of that magnitude for the gasoline tax. Anyway, if there hasn't been a change in gasoline tax for the past quarter of a century, there should be an increase in inflation of a couple cents over the 25 years. In addition to that, I also believe that simply being more efficient with one's bonding bills, such as the elimination of unnecessary programs and arts, culture programs compared to other necessities, that in and of itself should be the key towards improving the well-being and infrastructure of each of our residents. That makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen.
So transportation funding our infrastructure, roads and bridges is really, really vital for economic growth for our state. So we need to invest in this. It's one of or should be our top priorities, and unfortunately we didn't get a transportation bill done in the last session. And that was part of the reason was because Republicans in their own caucus couldn't agree on a way to fund infrastructure. So I think it does need to be a combination that we can all compromise and agree on. I think increasing our gas tax is one option. 8 other states that were Republican controlled increased their gas tax. So it should not be a partisan issue. Other proposals was the license tap fee and increasing the license tap fee and using the sales tax from auto parts, which I think might not be the best option because that right now goes to fund other things that are vital to the state like education and healthcare services. So we do need to sit back down at the table. We did have a compromise. The Republican chair of the Transportation Committee had a compromise bill that the speaker did not agree with, and that's why I think it failed, was that the Speaker of the House prevented that from going forward.
Thank you very much. Question number 3, Chris.
Rural broadband has been a stated priority in St. Paul that never seems to get adequate funding. How big a priority is it to you and why?
Liz, will begin with you.
Sure. I think it's an important part of, I grew up in greater Minnesota for a lot of time, and a lot of my family lives in greater Minnesota. It's an important part of our infrastructure as a state to be able to put, so that communities don't fall behind for a lot of reasons. And so I absolutely support making this a priority in the ways that we need to. And I think even though Duluth is more of a regional hub and we have a responsibility and a voice to also be in relationship with folks throughout the state that will rely on us to also use our voices on this issue.
Thank you very much, Dylan.
There seems to be a need for the increased rural broadband in the state of Minnesota. For example, I went to South Dakota in early August for a week to visit my cousins. And while I was down there, there was a boom in population, up to 20% in the city of Aberdeen. And the reason behind it primarily was because of the advent of broadband. Broadband wasn't as well used compared to St. Paul, compared to Duluth, compared to these other cities. But because of rural broadband, there was this population explosion. And businesses and engineers, they all were able to come down and improve the business of Aberdeen. So I do think there is a need for broadband in Minnesota, but like every other piece, I do believe that there needs to be accountability for putting each cent into said project, if that makes sense.
Jen?
So this was supposed to be a priority of the Republicans last session, is funding rural broadband. And I think people should think of it like funding electricity and funding phone service to greater Minnesota. Right now, we need broadband access for those folks living in greater Minnesota to help those rural communities with economic development and more opportunities. So we wanted to fund it at $50 million. Unfortunately, we only funded it last session at $10 million. So I think every year we need to start investing in rural broadband to make sure everybody has access to this service that all of us probably take for granted, but many people in greater Minnesota don't have access to it.
Thank you, Cody.
Thanks. As a matter of fact, I'm quite certain that absolutely every part of the state of Minnesota has broadband coverage. I know of at least 2 satellite internet companies that provide broadband, and their satellites cover every corner of Minnesota. That being said, that's not the best broadband. It's not the greatest service, but it is available. And I'm not entirely sure whether the question, communities has come up a couple times in the answers, but whether the question is addressing rural areas or actual towns and communities, population centers.
Anywhere.
Okay, well, then I'll give my answer.
The goal is, the stated goal has been border to border.
Okay, so the communities and population centers tend to have broadband, and I understand that people in rural areas struggle to get good broadband. I've lived in one of those areas, and it's a little frustrating. But if I do go to live in a rural area, I'm willing to do what it takes, and I can pay a little bit to get satellite internet or to get better service. If it costs extra, I understand that. So it's available, and I'm not ready to ask other people to give up their hard-earned money for a project that is not actually necessary for me when, like I said, broadband is available.
Thank you all very much. Our next question will be asked by Classy, and Dylan, you can go first, please.
How can state investments in education be more equitable? And what can the state do to help districts close the achievement gap?
That's a very good question. So I was listening to a piece on NPR a few months ago, and one of the pieces that they mentioned was there was a gap in terms of punishments between races. So for example, in St. Paul, for example, if a member of the African American youth was in trouble, their punishment compared to the Caucasian youth is significantly greater on a case-by-case basis. So if indeed it is a provable case that there is a case-by-case, there is an inequality of punishment, then that would be a violation of the Constitution, which has equal protection of the laws. And thus, as a conservative, I believe that that idea should be enforced. There should be some sort of enforcement, a committee, some sort of funding just to ensure that there is some sort of prevention of infringement of equal protection of liberties and law, if that makes sense. And oh yeah, and also the achievement gap, similar idea.
Thank you. Representative Schultz, questions about education and the achievement gap?
So funding education is a priority of our state. We need to make sure we're educating everyone and everyone has equal access to the same opportunities in education. To address the achievement gap, we need to do many things. One is we need to look at all of the issues that surround the achievement gap, not just in the classroom. So we need to look at full-service community schools, and we have a great model here of Myers-Wilkins. And we need to do more of those types of programs in Duluth and all across the state. We need to make sure that we have support staff and counselors, mental health counselors at the schools to help, and we need to make sure that we are helping families support their own children and doing things like addressing poverty, low income, and access to services. So we need to look at the whole picture when we look at achievement gaps in education and give the support to families and also to the school districts to make sure that everybody has access to the same opportunities and has a start in life very similar. And one way that we can do that is fund early education to make sure everyone is at the same starting point when they enter the school system.
Thank you. Cody?
I think Jen made a great point there, that education is not something that just happens at school. Education is something that happens at home, and it happens as a part of the society. So in order to be able to address this issue, I think we need to look at what's going on, how we can help those families, how we can help those societies and communities. I do believe that we need to fund the schools well, but we need to look hard at whether these are programs that are realistically going to produce good results, or whether we're just funding a program to say, hey, I funded education. So families, parents, and teachers, sometimes we get involved in debates about the unions and what the unions want, but the teachers don't necessarily want the same thing that the unions want. And so I think we need to look to the teachers and see what they want. We need to look to the parents and see what they want to help the education.
Thank you. Liz?
So I've been knocking on doors since May, and I have to say that this issue comes up a lot. This is a common conversation that people want to have as I'm out on the doors, specifically in West Duluth and different school neighborhoods. People see schools as not just a place to educate our children, but they're like foundations of strong communities. And so that there's a role that we have to make sure that we do that at a state level and prioritize education and never again go and balance our budget on the back of the school and our future of our youth. And so I think we can do that in a couple of ways around addressing equity. Is there's per pupil formulas that school districts rely on so that they can do some budgeting. We can make sure those keep up with inflation so that the school districts know that they have a reliable source so that they can lower class sizes or they can do whatnot. Jen mentioned the full schools community initiatives. Those are some really promising ways that we're looking at how schools serve the whole of the family and the whole of the community to really raise those education levels and the achievement gap. And I think we can fund special things like the integration specialists and other projects that really target the achievement gap.
Thank you. Vern, question 5, please.
Health insurance costs are skyrocketing and insurance companies are bailing. Should Minnesota abandon MNsure and move to the federal exchange? Or how can MNsure and access to health insurance be improved in Minnesota?
So Minnesota has opted to have their own state exchange called MNsure. And I was appointed by the governor to be on a healthcare finance task force to look at this very issue, to whether we should keep our MNsure state exchange or adopt the federal exchange. And the task force was a bipartisan group of individuals, 29, and we recommended that we stay with MNsure and not adopt the federal exchange because it would be more expensive for our state. And we've been very successful. We've decreased the number of people without insurance by 40%. So there are good things happening with MNsure, and we have to fix the problems, and there are problems with it, enrollment problems and IT glitches. But a lot of that stems with how the Affordable Care was structured and the amount of work that needed to be done to get MNsure off the ground in terms of IT. So we're working on this. I have bills to and help improve our healthcare system in Minnesota, and I hope next session they get a hearing. And one option is to have more plans available on the exchange to people so they can select from different plans and have a public option available to compete with our dwindling numbers of health insurance plans in the state.
Thank you. Cody?
You know, that's a hard question to answer because we live in a time when our federal government, or rather our Supreme Court, has taken Obamacare and on one instance said it's not a tax, so it's legal, and on another instance says it is a tax, so it's legal. And here we are stuck in the middle of it. So the MNsure was created to try and create the state exchange, and it ended up being a disaster. I've gotten my health insurance and applied through MNsure, and it was difficult. The website didn't work. So it's easy, and I wish everybody had good health care. And it's easy to say we want to provide more access to health care coverage. But what has happened as a result of MNsure is while maybe some numbers show that more people are covered, people are having a more difficult time actually getting health care. So I think that MNsure needs to be, we need to start over from the ground up.
Okay. Liz?
So what I would say is, I think we talk about it as MNsure being the problem, but I really think the problem stands outside of that. Our healthcare problems, our healthcare coverage problems are bigger than just IT glitches or a website not working. It's that right now insurance companies can't even profit off of the private way we do our insurance, and people aren't getting the coverage they need. I think so to say that it's a MNsure problem, I don't actually think it's a MNsure problem. I think MNsure has done a very good job at being what it needed to be for the state. If we remember back when the exchanges rolled out all over the country, the states that set up their own did better, and Minnesota did better. So it's not the fault of MNsure, it's the fault of just how our healthcare system is set up. And I think we need to start making step forwards with the federal government and with other partners to make sure that we start to really look at, well, how can we make sure that insurance companies are offering plans that they both can profit off of, but also provide the coverage that people so desperately need in our state. And so I'm interested in, Jen mentioned that we can start making some steps forward with a public option and other ways that we can start looking at healthcare coverage here.
Thank you. Dylan?
Rome wasn't built in a day, but unfortunately MNsure has proved that it will never be built under its current state. It is one thing for a group of individuals to create a bipartisan solution towards healthcare in the state of Minnesota, towards giving affordable care to hardworking individuals who are still below income. However, when we have a 300 million plus infringement of virus-ridden websites, when we have audits that cost the state up to $271 million, when we have a health insurance policy that prevents transgender low-income individuals from obtaining the necessary hormones needed to transition to their appropriate gender. This is an insurance plan that does need significant reform. I believe that by coordinating with individuals from UND computer engineers, we would be able to easily fix the MNsure website at a much more efficient and cheap rate than the $300 million. There's other plans, but I'm running out of time, so thank you.
Moving along, Chris?
Was the governor wrong to withdraw Twin Metals mineral leases? Why or why not? And where do you stand on precious metals mining in Minnesota?
Cody, will begin with you, sir.
Well, to the specifics of Twin Metals, I don't know that I can address that, but I will tell you where I stand on mining in Minnesota. I strongly support it, and I believe that my party has always been a party that supports environmental responsibility in developing our natural resources. We have some fantastic natural resources, and there is no reason that we shouldn't be able to make the most of them while protecting the environment at the same time. PolyMed's an example. Extensive studies have been done by people a lot smarter, a lot more educated than I, to make sure that we can take care of the environment. So having said that, it frustrates me and makes me sad when I see some people in the opposition party use environmental excuses to push certain agendas that really have nothing to do with protecting the environment.
Thank you very much, Liz.
It wouldn't be a forum if we didn't talk about rare mineral mining.
For 10 years now, we've been able to do it.
Right. So what I would say to this is that I'm not in either camp, that I believe that we need to do the mining, that's absolute hard and fast how I feel, or that we shouldn't due to the environmental needs. What I truly believe in is a healthy process. And the process should dictate the outcome, not the outcome dictate the process. I think right now as a state we're having a big conversation using two outcomes of how different groups of people want this to end and trying to move the process to that. But I don't think that sets us up for future success as a state. I think we actually need to really invest in the healthiest process that is going to time and time again lead us to an outcome that's best for our state. And so as a legislator, that's really what we do. We're about developing a process along with, other government entities that are in charge of making sure that our environment, standards are held and things. So I think that those are where we really need to invest our resources and continue to really think about is how do we develop the most healthy process to ensure good outcome time and time again, not just on a project by project basis.
Thank you, Dylan.
Time to dig into this one. So I agree with the notion that any organization, be it metals, be it polymet, any organization needs to maintain some sort of standard when it comes to environmentalism. However, with the recent loss of the metals project as well as the potential loss of the North Bend project from polymet, it's my belief that recent actions to try and hinder the process of permits and environmental checks have gone a little bit too far. I empathize with Gary Anderson's idea, for example, of the need to ensure the healthiness of the North Bend project. However, when you have a project that has been for 10 years passing permit after permit after permit after permit and have been causing mutual fund owners, the mom and pop industrial workers, to lose many of their life savings towards the stock of polymet, which has dipped over 50% in the past decade and whose net income has lost over $60 million, you have a need for polymet and the metals project to be passed forward so that the residents of St. Louis County can receive year after year approximately $500 million in revenue, which can then go towards funding education, healthcare, etc.
Thank you. Jen?
So we've been doing mining for a long time in Minnesota, and we want to make sure that when we do it in the future, that we do it the correct way and that we do it safely and that taxpayers are not responsible for the cost of cleanup or environmental issues. So we need to make sure that any mining project follows the process we have, and that means extensive environmental review and environmental impact statements. And polymet, initially, why the permitting process is taking so long is because the first EIS that they submitted wasn't sufficient and they had to go back and redo it. And so there's a lot of myths out there about what the delays were. In terms of twin metals and the governor saying that he wasn't in favor of it, that has to do with water quality. Our number one priority for the governor is making sure that we have high water quality and we don't have situations like Flint where we're contaminating our water supply. And so I think that was the issue with that project. I'm really concerned about the financial assurance with mining to make sure that they have enough money set aside so that if there is a problem with the mining, that it is cleaned up by the polymet, by the mining company, and not by taxpayers of Minnesota. So we need to make sure they follow the process that the DNR and the EPA has in place, and that if it's done, that it's done so it's environmentally sound and it doesn't cost taxpayers money when something goes wrong. And we need to, going slow is okay, because you will not be able to reverse damage if it is done. So going slow, I'm okay with making sure there's checks and balances and having the thorough review process and having it take a few years, that's fine. But we don't want to damage our water supply because it's hard to reverse.
I'm not sure if I heard anyone answer the first question, which was whether the governor was right or wrong to withdraw Twin Metals mineral leases. Yes, no, or I don't know, real quick. Cody?
I think it was wrong to withdraw
Yes.
it.
Liz?
I don't know.
Okay.
Governor shouldn't be interfering with Twin Metals' ability to push forward, so it's a bit wrong, yeah.
Okay. And Jen?
And I said basically that I think the governor did that because he was concerned with water quality, and I'm concerned with water quality as well.
So he was right. That was
Well,
right.
I don't know. I haven't studied a lot about the Twin Metals, but if it was too close to water supplies and Lake Superior, then I think that his decision was fine.
Thank you. Classy.
What should be done with the state budget surplus?
And Liz, will begin with you.
Great. So I think using the state budget surplus in the ways we just talked about, a lot of the priorities. So again, when I'm on the doors, I hear a lot about in education, transportation infrastructure, things like that. I think those are the types of things we need to make sure we're using our budget surplus wisely in ways that improve people's lives. And I think taking the concerns we hear directly from constituents and thinking about that as we use our budget surplus and making sure we invest it. I think that's how we could think about it, as surplus is also an investment in some very critical things that we need. And I always think education is both what I hear on the doors and also what we're talking about in this room is somewhere we can wisely invest money.
Thank you, Dylan.
There are many instances when there is a need to put a surplus fund towards the state of Minnesota. I'm just going to rattle off a couple of them. First is healthcare, specifically the mental health program. Indubitably, one of the things that I've seen talking to mental health workers in both Essentia and St. Luke's is that there is a lack of individualized therapy for individuals. For example, an individual who is suffering from schizophrenia doesn't receive the same treatment, will receive the same treatment as somebody that suffers from depression. And that might be a bit difficult because you're dealing with different individuals. So improving mental health might be one option needed. I agree that there needs to be more money put towards the roads, specifically in 34th Street. When I go down through 21st and 1st, for example, there are sidewalks where handicapped individuals oftentimes are unable to cross the sidewalks because of cracks and faults. That should be a fix. Also education, lowering the class size so that teachers are able to 1 to 15. I believe that the increase in funding so that you're able to create a more efficient education, that would overall create a more important use of surplus funds, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Jen.
So we are lucky that our state has done so well economically to have a surplus. And I don't want to be quick to spend it all. I think it's important that we reserve a lot of that surplus into a reserve fund for when we have a deficit, because we might not all be able to collect as much tax revenue every year. We may have years where we have a weaker economy. So that said, but we do have a fairly large surplus, so I think we need to spend some of that to fund early education and to help invest in our infrastructure. So I think we can spend some of it, but also it's important to reserve a piece of that for when we don't have a surplus in the state.
Very good, Cody.
I think that talking about a government surplus to me is a fascinating issue, because when we tax someone, we go to their door and we take that money away from them against their will. So we do that with a commitment that we are taking that money for projects that are necessary. So the fact that we have taken more money from people than we need to meet what is in our budget, that money doesn't really belong to the government in the first place. It always belonged to the people. So if we have a surplus, we should be giving that back to the people that we took it from.
Very good. Our next question will come from Vern.
Local government aid has been criticized for being unfair to some communities and inadequate. What changes are needed to LGA?
Dylan, I think it's your turn to go first.
So we talk about local government aid and to put funds towards appropriate projects. As I have said earlier, there are certain projects that I do not want to see pass the light of day, such as the Glen Sheet project, such as the hockey project. However, in the city of Duluth, I realize that there are some projects that need funding, such as for equity, such as for health care, and the need for education. I do believe we need a task force committee set up in Duluth, a bipartisan committee, if you will, to be able to sit down and just go over each of the proposals sent through anybody from West Duluth or East Duluth, where they sit down and they say, which is more feasible towards an efficient economy, which can generate more revenue, which can better serve the citizens of Duluth. That makes sense.
Thank you. Representative Schultz.
So local government aid is very, very vital to our city of Duluth and other communities in Minnesota. And that said, what the Republicans tried to do in the last session was cut our local government aid by more than 40%, which would have taken a big hit for our services that we provide in the city of Duluth. So I really had to go out and defend not cutting LGA. There's a large group of organizations and communities and constituents who are advocating to increase local government aid back to its 2002 levels. And I would like to see that happen. I'm hopeful that I can be in those conversations next year where I can defend local government aid and increase it for Duluth.
Thank you, Cody.
Well, I'm going to have to give you the same answer that I sometimes give my students when they ask me questions, and the answer is, I don't really know, but I can get back to you on that. I don't know all the intricacies of local government aid yet and the best solution on that, so I don't want to speak to it specifically.
All right, very good. Liz?
So local government aid is really crucial for Duluth. We're a regional hub, and so local government aid is used not just in a way that benefits Duluth, but we see a lot of people coming into Duluth using our services and whatnot, and so it's a regional investment, and that's really been the approach of local government aid, and something we really rely on. As an older city with older infrastructure and whatnot, this is something that's really essential. And as Jen Schultz had mentioned, that there was formula changes, and we really need to go back to the higher way that the formula was calculated and make sure it keeps up with inflation and restore the funding cuts. We can't cut local government aid. We actually need to make sure that we continue to increase it and fight for what we need here in Duluth. It's an essential part. I mean, we're a unique city too. We're very long, and our first responders it takes a while for them to get from one side to the next, and a big chunk of that local government aid goes to funding our first responders. So it's really essential that we have that money, and as a legislator, I would work to make sure that we increase those formulas again so that we can really rely on it as a city.
Thank you, candidates, very much. Chris, it's your turn again.
What are 2 things the legislature can do this session to boost the economy in northeastern Minnesota?
Jen, we'll start with you.
Sure. So what we need to happen for Northeast Minnesota, especially on the Iron Range, is to make sure we bring more jobs and diversify their economy. So what we need to do is invest in programs, education programs, and scholarships and funding to make sure people have other opportunities, not just in the mining operations, to diversify that economy and provide incentives for economic development and growth. And improve broadband so they have entrepreneurial activities increased. We also need to invest in not just education, but clean energy. And so I think this is going to be a big opportunity to invest in clean energy in Northeast Minnesota, and will bring many more jobs to Northeast Minnesota.
Thank you, Cody.
That's an interesting point of view, that how our government should invest in the economy to help it grow. But I want to disagree with you entirely, because when we say that our government is investing in the economy, the problem is that means our government is choosing certain companies and certain groups to give money to and to subsidize and to incentivize. Those are kind of political words, I think, but our government is picking who wins and who loses. And I don't think that's the role of government. And one way we could have helped our economy is by not taking the Sandpiper pipeline. And that's gone now. That's water under the bridge. We could have had all kinds of jobs. I had family members who were ready to work on the Sandpiper pipelines because it was near their home, and it would have been a great income for them. So one of my brothers now is working in a chip factory instead of on the Sandpiper pipeline, because that didn't get approved. So our government, actually, to help the economy, needs to stop hurting it. We need to stop using agendas and regulations to hurt these businesses. We need to stop taxing some to subsidize others. Stop picking winners and losers. Just let it be a fair playing field, and the economy will do great.
Thank you, Liz.
I think I won't pretend to be an economic development expert, but what I can do is be in relationship with folks who in our city understand economic development, understand what it takes for not only our community but the larger region to thrive. And as a legislator, we can provide tools and incentives to businesses to be job creators, to regional hubs to have the tools that they need in order to grow. I think another point too is really to think about, like, economic development is beyond just growing jobs. It's about how healthy are our communities. How do people want to locate? That means strong schools, places to recreate, those types of things as well. And so I think that as a whole, we can think about that as a legislative body, is how are we making our communities whole with the investments we do? So not just creating jobs, but are the jobs paying living wages? Are they providing the benefits that families need so that they don't live in poverty and that we don't cycle into being unhealthy communities?
Thank you, Dylan.
Quote HCDC Money Talks, and there seems to be a need to improve the economy in northeastern Minnesota. As to the 2 specific things needed to improve, the first obvious is the need for the North Bend project to be passed. I've seen many arguments. For example, Jen brought up the point that there needs to be early childhood education. There has also been a need for infrastructure, according to the other candidates. And with the North Bend project passed, that brings to the county of St. Louis, according to the UMD Leathervitz School of Business, a $500 million plus revenue. Second is the need for startups. Companies such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these companies bring billions of dollars of revenue per year to the cities such as Palo Alto, California. we don't have any startups because we have a significantly higher property tax, according to many of the residents I've spoken to. If we offer property tax incentives, then the startups come. Now the counter argument, of course, is, oh, well, education is affected. Well, education is only affected for a brief period of time, and the revenues generated from these startups would more than make up for the increase in startups that come into Eastern Duluth, such as technology and education, etc. Thank you.
Very good. I wish all candidates would quote AC/DC. Classy.
Alrighty, we've touched on a lot of topics here today. What do you think are the biggest issues facing the Minnesota legislator? What are your priorities, and how do you plan to tackle them?
Very good. Cody, we'll begin with you, sir.
Well, my priority in a word is freedom. I think hopefully by now it doesn't come to a surprise to any of you that I believe in limited government. And so I think we need freedom in education. That means parents should be involved, teachers should be making choices. Parents and teachers, rather than unions and government, should be the ones with the power over the education. I believe in freedom in the economy. I think that means government should not be choosing who wins and who loses, who should get subsidized and who doesn't, but government should be allowing companies to compete on a fair playing field. I believe in freedom for life. You know, I don't know who, we haven't had this question asked, but I don't know what candidates at this table are and are not pro-life, but I am a pro-life candidate. It's hard to have freedom if you don't have life. So I believe in freedom for individuals. That means the government should take away less taxes and only spend on projects that are necessary, things like roads, bridges, and infrastructure, education that are absolutely necessary, and not take away people's money to use on projects that we don't absolutely need. Thank you.
Very good. Liz, the question is on the legislature's biggest issues and your priorities.
Sure. Well, I think of a conversation I had last Sunday when I was out in Irving Park on the doors. I was talking to a man who was filling his bird feeder with seed. He came down off his ladder, and he just looked at me when I asked, what do you think are the biggest issues we're facing, and what can the legislature do about them? He just looked at me, and he looked very sad and defeated, and he said, it's been a hard year. And he said, I'm looking for something more hopeful. And we didn't really agree necessarily on all of the priorities, but I think people are thirsty for a government that works together, are thirsty for things that help actually make their lives better. And so that's the kinds of things I want to go in with, is not just having an ideals of, I think there's things we can do, like certain policies we pass that could go into effect and dramatically improve people's lives right away. But we don't get there by just going in with hopes, without wanting to work together, without wanting to build relationships, without wanting to have a better picture of what's possible, rather than the current political rhetoric that we see every day. People are thirsty for something different. And we need to it's going to take all of us at the table to really come together to create that vision together. And so I want to be a part of shaping that this legislative session.
Thank you, Bill.
Three of the biggest issues that I've seen while running for the State House is constituents, common sense, and consensus. The constituents are a tremendous issue in the state in the sense that they feel alienated, and rightfully so. We have two squabbling parties that have divided each other over frivolous projects. They have sunk to the lowest of depths in the 11th hour as a means of assuring the funding necessary to help continue projects. So as a state rep, my goal would be to go to each of these individuals and get their allegiance back, to gain their trust back after the disaster responding bill this year. Common sense, of course, has been explained quite a bit. We need to have more efficient projects. And just the need for consensus. We need to have both parties sit in a room and get stuff done, be it a balanced budget amendment. We need them to sit and get stuff done so that our constituents don't have to worry about another year of bonding bill failures, of potential deficits, of a lack of improvements to the city of Duluth. That is what the issues that I see that I want to see improved in this state.
Thank you, Jen.
So the legislative priorities are a bonding bill that hopefully will happen in the first 30 days of session, and then transportation funding. Those are the priorities. My priorities, my priority is to help my constituents every day. So when I door knock, they're really surprised that their legislator is showing up at their door. I was in my office in St. Paul on Monday, and I picked up my office phone, and the woman couldn't believe that it was me on the other end of the phone. But my job is to help my constituents every day, and that doesn't just mean people in Duluth, it means people in the whole state of Minnesota. And how I can do that is use my skills as an economist and really be an economist for the people of Minnesota and pay back what people invested in my public education and pay that back to everyone to help them with health care, to help them with education, to help them any problem that they have in their daily lives that a state legislator can help. That's my role, and that's why it's been so rewarding, and I hope that I can return next year.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our questions. I thank the candidates once again for Minnesota House 7A and Minnesota House 7B for being here for your thoughtful answers. I think those in attendance, those watching online, will wrap things up by allowing our candidates up to 2 minutes to kind of maybe wrap things up, your priorities and why voters should support you. Because I want the candidates who are opposing each other to kind of talk one right after the other. We're going to go right to left. We're going to go a little bit different order. So we'll start with you, Liz, then we'll go to Cody, and then Representative Schultz and then Dylan. Liz, up to 2 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for your time to be here and to ask such thoughtful questions. I think that this dialogue is really good and really fruitful, even if we don't share exactly how we're going to get there, to at least share where we're going. So I really appreciate the questions. So I'm running, as I've said before, because I believe policy at its best is about improving people's lives. And as a legislator, that's what we can do. We can shape the policy based on what we hear directly from our constituents around the priorities of the district, around what the needs are for 7B. And I will take those voices and I will bring those to the Capitol and I will listen to them and be someone who's accessible. I've worked, like I've mentioned, for the last 12 years on a variety of issues and built relationships. And at the foundation of being a good legislator is good relationships and building trust with constituents to get things done. And so I'll continue to build on those. And even though we may not agree on everything, I will be committed to continually come back to the table to continue to have that conversation. And I think we do best when we do it together. And I think the more voices we have at the table, the better off we'll be. And so I want to be the type of legislator that really governs in that way, that when we shape policy that affects a group of people, I want that group of people to be at the table talking about how that policy is going to affect them. And so that's going to take more of us being engaged. It's going to take more of us to change what our government does, how it functions, so that it's healthier, so that it really is responsive to the people it serves. And so as a legislator, I would do that, and I would be beholden to the folks of 7B and the stories I'm hearing out on the doors from grandparents concerned about their grandchildren's futures, to the kids that followed me on their bicycles and shared with me all about their neighborhood, what they loved, who was grouchy, what they loved about their school. And I want to take those voices and use those to shape what I do. So I thank you for listening, and I ask for your support on the ballot on November 8th.
Thank you very much. Liz Olson, of course, is a DFL candidate for 7B. The Republican candidate is Cody Behringer. Cody?
Thank you. And thanks, Liz. You know, there are some things that I want to address. And from what I've seen from Liz and her resume, I think she's got great intentions. I think everybody here has great intentions. But as you said, we have different ideas of how to get to those ends. And so let me talk a little bit about what the Democratic Party has been doing lately. Matter of fact, I was just thinking, should I talk about the Second Amendment? And then I thought, what about the First Amendment? And what about the 10th Amendment? And what about all the amendments? And what about the entire Constitution of the United States? But then I realized the whole thing's under attack. It's not just the Second Amendment. I want to stand for the Second Amendment, but the Democratic Party has been attacking our right, the right of law-abiding citizens to have guns, and that right is protected in a constitutional amendment. That's no small deal. The federal government, the Democratic Party, and, well, maybe some in my party too, have been attacking our right as states. The 10th Amendment allows us as states to control everything that is not mentioned, enumerated in the Constitution. Now, I think we as states and state governments ought to push back when the federal government encroaches on our powers, because our founding fathers gave us that right. So, the Democrats want to take away our guns. The Democrats want to take away the rule of law in our country. We've got runarounds. The Constitution is being a runaround. The Supreme Court, like I said, says here, now it's a tax, now it's not a tax. You know what? Let's just mandate one healthcare system for everybody in our country, whether they like it or not. That's not the way freedom works. The way freedom works is allowing doctors and patients to choose what's best, not having the government choose, okay? I don't think the government should be able to choose whether people have the right to life or not, specifically the unborn, but there are people in the Democratic Party that want to push euthanasia. So all of these things, to me, they concern me. I see them as dangers. And so when I sit up here and I say, you know what, the reason that I want to be involved and I want to do something about this is because I grew up in a free country, and it's amazing. The opportunities that I've had, I can pursue my dreams, I can live, I can in peace with my community, my friends, and I have a son. And what I want is I want him to grow up and be old, and I want him to have those same opportunities. But if we allow our government to get overrun by this big government mentality, those freedoms are going to go away.
Thank you very much. That brings us to Minnesota House District 7A. The incumbent is Representative Jennifer Schultz. Representative Schultz, up to 2 minutes to wrap up.
Well, I just want to thank you all for being here and for organizing this forum, and for Chuck for helping moderate it. It's really important that we have these forums and people have a chance to get educated about who they're going to support on November 8th. I believe the government can be a very positive influence to help people in Minnesota and in Duluth. And I believe in the government, especially when there's market failures and there are no services available. And I don't know how you can be free if you're sick and don't have access to health care. Then freedom isn't worth as much. I think it's important that the government supports people so they can be successful and productive citizens. And I think part of the problem in St. Paul was that many folks on the Republican side don't believe in the government and how it can be a positive impact on people's lives, and therefore don't want to invest. We have a very efficient state government system. The thing that I was most impressed with when I got to St. Paul 2 years ago was the talent that we have working for the state. Our House staff, our House research, nonpartisan staff, they were amazing. Every day they go and help people in Minnesota. And so I was really impressed. And we're very lean as a state in terms of our state government number of employees. So I'm there to try to help people by using the government in a positive way. And I want to continue to do that. And I believe that it's important that people are engaged and that they contact their local representatives and meet with them. And people don't, I'm surprised at how few people do contact me for help. But people don't realize how accessible we can be to help them engage and make government a positive influence in their lives. And I want to make sure that our state continues to move forward. And so for me, it's really important that the DFL get the majority back so we continue what we've done, what we did 4 years ago in increasing the minimum wage and helping working families move forward.
Thank you very much. Our District 7A Republican challenger is Dylan Radden. Dylan?
I represent the party of the individual known as Ronald Reagan. And many years ago, he said to his constituents, who, among these constituents here in this audience, I personally thank you for your attendance and the braveness of your ability to sit here and watch a rambling discussion for an hour. But as we sit here and discuss Ronald Reagan, one of the quotes he said was, "Are you better off now than where you were 4 years ago?" I would like to modify that a bit. Are you, the citizens of District 7A, better off now than you were 2 years ago? Is the healthcare premiums that you currently have at a stable or lesser value than they were the previous 2 years? Is the education that you possess a more equitable and prosperous than 2 years ago? Do you feel that the economy in the city of Duluth is in better shape than it was in 2014? Do you believe that government has become more efficient, more trustworthy? Do you feel that it has become a consensus? If so, then I think you have found your candidate. However, if you as a constituent do not believe that the recent years of the city of Duluth have been as progressing in terms of its prosperity as you believe it is, then I am the candidate that idealistically you should vote for. There are numerous issues that I have failed to bring up in the previous hour or so, such as the need for interstate commerce in health insurance, the need towards a more equitable situation in all other forms. But I believe that I best represent the ideals needed to prosper in the city of Duluth. As my tagline says, if it's broke, fix it. And as the state rep of District 7A, I will fix a broken government and make the problem of government become a much more efficient and effective place for all of the constituents of the state of Minnesota and the city of Duluth and District 7A. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.